The cockpit of a C-17 Globemaster III smells of stale coffee, ozone, and the faint, ever-present scent of hydraulics. It's a familiar, comfortable smell for Captain Alex "Rook" Rourke. He sat in the left-hand seat, his hands resting lightly on the yoke as the massive transport aircraft ate up the miles over the Indian Ocean. To his right, his co-pilot, Captain Maria "Blaze" Petrov, was a study in relaxed professionalism, her eyes scanning the readouts with a practiced, almost bored efficiency. In the jump seat behind them, Flight Engineer Staff Sergeant Kevin "Wrench" Riley was a silent presence, his headphones on, a small tablet displaying maintenance logs clutched in his lap. To them, Alex was just a pilot, a solid, if unremarkable, one. He had a reputation for being quiet, almost withdrawn, and a little too by the book. He wasn't a flashy fighter jock or a brash helicopter pilot. He flew the bus, as they called it, the workhorse of the Air Force. He was good at it, but he wasn't a legend. He was just Rook, the pilot who never seemed to get rattled. They had no idea that their routine flight was a meticulously orchestrated ghost mission, a delicate ballet of deception that he had been preparing for months. The mission was simple. On the surface, a humanitarian aid run to a newly established forward operating base in a politically volatile region. The manifest was sealed, which was unusual but not unheard of. Alex knew what was inside the massive crate strapped down in the cargo bay. A single, self-contained, high-tech sensor array, a piece of equipment so sensitive and so valuable that it couldn't be trusted to the usual delivery channels. It was a one-of-a-kind prototype designed to detect and track a specific type of airborne threat, a threat that didn't officially exist yet. The mission's code name, Chupacabra, was fitting for a creature of myth and legend. The silence in the cockpit was broken only by the low thrum of the 4 engines and the occasional chirp of the avionics. "Blaze, check your fuel burn on engine 3, Alex said, his voice calm. "Looks like it's a little high." Maria glanced at her own screen. "Looks normal to me, Rook. Are you seeing something different?" "Just a slight deviation from the baseline," Alex said, his eyes on his screen. He was looking at a hidden feed, a single, glowing line on a separate display that showed a minute adjustment in his flight path. The deviation was so slight, so infinitesimal, that no one else would have noticed it. It was the first of many such adjustments, each one a subtle correction to the wind, the atmospheric pressure, the curvature of the Earth. Each one was a small step on a path that only he could see. The mission had a series of waypoints that looked random on the flight plan. They appeared to be standard navigational points, but for Alex, they were a series of precise coordinates, each one a small node, in a complex three-dimensional grid. The goal was to fly an exact, predetermined route that would make it impossible for any ground-based radar or satellite to get a clean sweep of their flight path. They were flying through a series of radar shadows, and Alex was a master of the dance. The first hint of something being truly wrong came as they approached the target region. The flight plan called for a high-altitude approach, but Alex began to descend, a slow, steady drop that brought them lower than protocol dictated. "Rook, our flight plan says we're supposed to hold at 30,000 feet, Maria said, her voice a little sharper now. "Why the change in altitude?" Alex didn't look at her. His eyes were glued to a screen he was mentally projecting in his head. "I'm seeing some unexpected turbulence at our current altitude. It's a little too close to the front. We're going to fly low to avoid it." Maria checked her own weather radar. "The radar shows the front is still an hour away. It's clear skies for at least 100 miles. "Just a precaution, Blaze," Alex said, his voice a low, soothing hum. "No need to rattle the cargo. We'll be at our target destination soon enough." Maria didn't argue, but her eyes narrowed in suspicion. She looked at Wrench in the jump seat, and the flight engineer simply shrugged, his own expression a mask of quiet confusion. The pilot was a little weird, but he was the commander. You didn't question the commander unless you had a good reason. The real challenge came an hour later. They were deep in enemy airspace, flying low over a desolate landscape. A red light blared on the console, a shrill, insistent alarm that cut through the silence like a knife. "Missile lock!" Wrench yelled, his voice a sudden bark of panic. Maria's hand shot out, her fingers flying over the countermeasures panel. She began to deploy flares and chaff, a desperate automatic response. Alex, however, was still. He was calm, his hands still on the yoke. "Stand down, Maria," he said, his voice a low command. "Stand down! Are you crazy? We're locked!" she screamed. Alex ignored her. His eyes were on the small, almost imperceptible dot on his navigation screen. It was a signal from the ground, a low-powered, almost undetectable ping from a new anti-aircraft system. It wasn't a missile lock. It was a test for him. The Chupacabra sensor was so valuable that it couldn't be trusted to a place without first testing the enemy's capabilities. He was the test subject. "I repeat, stand down," Alex said, his voice now a quiet steel. "There is no missile. It's a low-frequency radar sweep. They're probing for weaknesses. We are their weakness." Maria's fingers stopped. She stared at him, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. She had never heard of a radar system that behaved this way. Alex, meanwhile, was already in action. He pressed a button on the yoke, a button that, to Maria, was a standard trim control. It was, however, his access key to a secondary system, a suite of electronic countermeasures that were not on the C-17's standard manifest. He sent a series of high-frequency pulses, a ghost signal that mimicked an entire squadron of fighter jets. The pulses were a complex symphony of electronic warfare designed to overwhelm and confuse the enemy radar system. The red light on the console vanished. The alarm ceased. The silence in the cockpit was now a heavy, oppressive thing. Maria looked at Wrench, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What was that?" Wrench asked, his voice a whisper. Alex ignored the question. "Blaze, take the yoke. I need to make a final check." He stood up, his movements fluid, and disappeared into the cargo bay. Maria sat in his seat, her mind reeling. He was calm. He was unfazed. He had acted as if he knew the threat was coming, and he had dealt with it as if he had been trained to do so. They were just pilots. He was something else. In the cargo bay, Loadmaster Master Sergeant Big Mike Garcia, a mountain of a man with a gentle face, was standing by the massive crate, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at Alex, his eyebrows raised. "Heard the alarm. What was that?" "Just a radar sweep, Mike," Alex said, his voice a low hum. "They're testing the water. Nothing to worry about." Mike nodded, but his eyes were on the small panel on the side of the crate. A red light was blinking, a sign that the package was armed and ready to be deployed. A moment later, a green light flashed and the blinking stopped. Alex had just armed the payload from the cockpit. Mike was a professional. He knew the protocol. The payload wasn't supposed to be armed until they were at the target. "We're a little ahead of schedule, aren't we?" Mike said, his voice a quiet question. "The schedule is a suggestion, Mike. This cargo has its own timeline," Alex said. He walked to the back of the bay to the massive open hatch. He strapped himself in, his eyes on the desolate landscape. Below, he saw the exact coordinates of the drop zone, a small, barely perceptible cluster of rocks in the middle of a vast desert. He saw the coordinates of the sensor's landing zone, a small, unmarked patch of sand a few hundred meters away. He was a ghost, a whisper in the wind, a shadow that no one could see. The mission was his alone. He looked at Mike. "I need you to open the hatch on my mark." "On your mark?" Mike asked, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you want me to call back to the cockpit for the drop signal?" "No," Alex said. "I'll give you the signal myself. It's a new procedure for this type of payload. It's a little more sensitive." Mike nodded, his mind a whirl of questions. "A new procedure?" A sensitive payload? A ghost mission. He knew the mission was a bit odd, but this was too much. The cockpit was already a place of controlled panic. Now the cargo bay was a place of quiet, unspoken questions. Back in the cockpit, Maria was still holding the yoke, her eyes darting between the readouts and the empty seat next to her. The man who sat there, the man she thought she knew, was a complete stranger. He had handled the missile lock with an eerie calm, as if he knew it wasn't a real threat. He had used a system that wasn't on the C-17's manifest. He was a ghost. "Wrench," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Get the manifest. Find out what's in that crate. We need to know what we're carrying." Wrench, his face pale, pulled out his tablet. "I can't. The manifest is sealed. I can't access it without command authorization." "Override it," she said, her voice a hiss. "We are in a situation here. We need to know what we're carrying. This isn't a humanitarian aid mission, Wrench. This is something else." Wrench looked at her, then at the empty seat. He knew she was right. They had been lied to, and the man who had lied to them was in the back, preparing to do something they couldn't even begin to imagine. He began to type, his fingers flying over the tablet's screen, a furious dance of code and commands. The tablet flashed a red warning, but Wrench, his mind now a blur of adrenaline and fear, ignored it. He had to know. They had to know. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay, Alex was staring at the ground, his eyes fixed on the small, almost invisible marker. He had to be at the exact right spot, at the exact right speed, at the exact right altitude. A single millimeter off, a single second too fast or too slow, and the mission would fail. The payload would be lost, its secrets revealed, its potential to save countless lives forever gone. He felt the C-17 shudder as he made another minute adjustment. He was a conductor, and the plane was his orchestra. He was a ghost in the machine, manipulating the massive aircraft with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. He was flying not with his hands, but with his mind. "Mike," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "Get ready." Mike, his hand on the lever, nodded. He didn't say a word. He just waited, his eyes on Alex, his mind a mix of fear and a new, profound respect. He had seen fighter pilots do impossible things. He had seen legends in action, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't bravado. This was something else. This was a man who knew the secrets of the sky, who could bend the laws of physics to his will. "Mark!" Alex yelled. Mike pulled the lever. The massive hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a vast, empty expanse of sky and ground. The cold air rushed in, a blast of Arctic wind that made him shiver. The crate slid out, a silent, dark shadow that fell into the darkness below. It was gone in a moment, its mission a secret that only Alex and a handful of people knew. Back in the cockpit, Maria and Wrench watched in stunned silence. The tablet in Wrench's hand suddenly flashed, a message appearing on the screen. It was the mission manifest. He held it up to Maria. She stared at it, her eyes wide with disbelief. It read, "Payload, crate, contents, classified, mission, ghost." She looked at Wrench, then at the empty seat, then at the open hatch in the cargo bay. Alex, the unassuming pilot, had just accomplished the impossible. He had flown a ghost mission, a solo act of defiance against the very laws of the sky. He had lied to them, deceived them, and in doing so, he had saved their lives. When Alex returned to the cockpit, his face was calm, his posture relaxed. He sat in his seat, his hands back on the yoke. He looked at Maria, at the look of stunned disbelief on her face, and he simply smiled. "Rough ride, huh?" he said, his voice a low hum. "The cargo's been delivered. We're on our way home." Maria didn't say a word. She couldn't. She simply stared at him, at the man she thought she knew, at the ghost who had just shown her the true meaning of power. The mission was a success. The legend was born. And they, the crew of the C-17 Globemaster III, were simply the witnesses to a miracle. The aftermath and the unspoken truth. The rest of the flight was a surreal, almost silent affair. The crew went about their duties with a quiet professionalism, but the unspoken tension was a living thing in the small space of the cockpit. Maria kept glancing at Alex, her mind replaying the events of the last hour. She saw the cool, calm way he had handled the missile lock. She saw the way he had manipulated the aircraft with an almost supernatural precision. She saw the ghost in the machine, and she couldn't look away. When they landed back at the base, the debriefing was short and to the point. An officer in a black suit with no identifying insignia met them on the tarmac. He didn't look at them. He only looked at Alex. "Captain Rourke," the man said, his voice a low monotone. "The payload has been received. The mission is a success. You are to report to command immediately." Alex simply nodded. He didn't look at his crew. He just walked away, his shoulders straight, his movements as fluid as ever. Maria, Wrench, and Mike stood on the tarmac, watching him go. They were a team of hardened veterans, men and women who had seen the worst of war, but they had never seen anything like this. They had seen heroes, they had seen legends, but they had never seen a ghost. They knew they would never be the same again. Their world, once a simple black and white place of flight plans and manifests, was now a place of shadows and secrets. In the debriefing room, Alex sat opposite the man in the black suit. The man slid a file across the table. It was his new assignment. He was no longer a pilot. He was a ghost. He was to be a pilot on the surface, a man with a normal life, a normal career. But his true mission was to fly the Yun Flown, to deliver the undeliverable, to be a ghost in the machine. He would be alone, with no one to trust, no one to confide in. He was a legend, and he would be a ghost. Years passed. Maria went on to become a commander of her own squadron. Wrench went on to become a flight instructor, teaching new recruits how to fly the C-17. Mike went on to become a civilian, a family man with a quiet life, but they never forgot the man who had shown them the secret world of ghosts. They would talk about him in hushed tones, the story of the pilot who was more than he seemed, the story of the ghost who had saved their lives. And sometimes, when a strange flight plan would come across their desk, a flight plan with a series of random, almost nonsensical waypoints, they would look at each other and they would know. They would know that a ghost was on the wing and that the world was a little safer for it. The story was a legend, a myth, a tale told around a fire pit. But for Maria, Wrench, and Mike, it was a memory that they would never forget. They had seen a ghost, and they had been changed by it. They had seen a man who was more than he seemed, and they had learned that in the chaos of war, true power is often quiet, unassuming, and utterly lethal. They had thought he was just a pilot, but they knew he was a ghost, and they knew that the world was a better place for it.